Hello, my name is Lauren, and in this short, I'm going to be exploring the concept of pacifism. To look at this concept, I'm going to use this media item of an iconic photograph of a woman offering a soldier a flower. I'm first going to give some context about the media item, define pacifism and look at its history, explain how pacifism relates to the media item, relate this media item to a movement with pacifistic sentiments, and finally comment on the media item's longevity. The photograph was taken by photojournalist Mark Ribot. This scene happened at an anti-Vietnam War protest at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia on the 21st of October, 1967. The photo's main subject is Jan Rose Cashmere, who was 17 years old at the time. In an article published by Smithsonian Magazine, Ribot recalls of the event. She was just talking, trying to catch the eye of the soldiers, maybe try to have a dialogue with them. I had the feeling the soldiers were more afraid of her than she was of the bayonets. Taking a step back, pacifism, defined in its simplest of terms, is an opposition to war and violence. For many, pacifism shares similar sentiments with many of the largest religions in the world, including Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, and Judaism. Though reflected, for example, in the Bible's teachings to do unto others as you would want them to do unto you, and in other religious texts from various religions, pacifism is not to be conflated with any sort of religious framework. Pacifism is not a concept born out of any specific religion. Rather, the term was coined by the French peace campaigner Émile Arnaud. Arnaud formed the International League for Peace and Freedom in 1861, and in its treatise described his new political movement of pacifism. He saw pacifism to balance the violence he saw emerging in other movements of the time, such as anarchism. Looking more in depth at its philosophy, pacifism is more than a simple opposition to violence. In her essay, Pacifism, a Philosophical Analysis, Jan Narveson explains that the idea of violence is evil is not an ideology that is uncommon for most to agree with. With exceptions, of course, most people with moral convictions would agree with this sentiment. She writes, "The pacifist goes a very long step further. His belief is not only that violence is evil, but also that it is morally wrong to use force to resist, punish, or prevent violence. This further step makes pacifism a radical moral doctrine." So where is the line drawn on what is and isn't considered pacifism? If you use physical force to prevent someone from harming you, is that considered a violation of a pacifist's code of ethics? Many would argue that force is okay in the name of protecting yourself. But if force is justified in this regard, this logic would suggest all force is okay in the name of protection, which is most definitely not what pacifism is. So the question remains, where is the line drawn? It largely seems to depend on the pacifist, and you will undoubtedly find reasoning supporting both sides of this question. In my understanding and my opinion on pacifism, I would argue that any force at all is a violation of the pacifist sentiment. In my understanding, it seems that force is not an option in any circumstance without exception. Narveson writes, "A genuine pacifist cannot merely say that we may, if we wish, prefer not to resist violence with force. He must say instead that for whatever class of people he thinks it applies to, there is something positively wrong about meeting violence with force." So how exactly does this photograph embody pacifism? Perhaps the answer is a little more than obvious. It displays a person in clear protest to violence, which may only be gathered after knowing this scene took place at an anti-war protest, using absolutely no force in doing so, unless, of course, a flower could be seen as a weapon. Furthermore, this represents pacifism in that even though Kashmir is protesting the concept of war, she is merely offering a flower to war's physical representation. If she were forcing the flower into the soldier's hand, or perhaps yelling that the soldier accept the flower, that would no longer fit into pacifism's doctrine. While these are both still relatively harmless variations of the scene, it is the use of force that differentiates them from pacifism and not. Like me in researching this photograph, you may be thinking, aren't there some more pictures of people giving flowers to soldiers? There are. Also, like me, you may be wondering, what's with all the flowers? The answer to that lies in the flower power movement. That this isn't simply a motto from the Austin Powers trilogy came as news to me. Flower power evolved from beat poet Allen Ginsberg's essay, Demonstration or Spectacle as Example, as communication or how to make a march/spectacle, in which he wrote, masses of flowers, a visual spectacle, especially concentrated in the front lines, can be used to set up barricades, to present to Hell's Angels, police, politicians, and press and spectators whenever needed or at parade's end. Marchers should bring crosses to be held up in front in case of violence, like in the movies dealing with Dracula. Ginsberg's urging to use flowers as a sign of protest resonated with those involved in the anti-war protests, and thus flower power was born. It was a slogan which promoted pacifism at its finest, because what is less threatening or forceful than a flower? Eventually, flower power was adopted by the counterculture movement as a whole, which explains its pervasiveness in the Austin Powers films. Rimbaud's photograph captures an iconic time in America and the world in general's history, but admittedly there are many other great examples of pacifism from this time, and from others. What made flower power stand out to me was its longevity. A simple Google image search of people offering soldiers flowers offers thousands of results. Granted, I don't know the context behind many of them, and in trying to find the background, I came up largely unsuccessful. I assume this is because this concept is no longer as newsworthy of a topic. If you were photographed today offering a soldier a flower, you probably wouldn't be featured on the front page of newspapers worldwide like Kashmir was. But the fact that this same scene happens fairly often, and the fact that millions of people now associate the gesture with a peaceful message, is what I think pacifism is all about. The Smithsonian's article that outlined Rimbaud's work also caught up with the photograph's protagonist almost 40 years later. In 2004, Kashmir attended a protest in London of the Iraq War. To the protest, she brought a blown-up photo of her iconic 1967 moment with the word peace written across the top. Rimbaud photographed her again in yet another vivid example of pacifism. The fact that the photograph taken in 1967 applies just as well to the circumstances Kashmir was protesting in 2004 says a lot about the photo's impact and relevance. Perhaps the statement Kashmir was trying to make by resurfacing her iconic image is that peace is the answer to many of life's problems, regardless of year. I think pacifists would agree with that logic. Of the original photograph, she told Smithsonian, all of a sudden I realized them was that soldier in front of me, a human being I could just as easily have been going out on a date with. This perhaps captures another facet common within the pacifist ideology, which is realizing that no one, regardless of what they have done or who they might be, is deserving of anything less than peace from fellow human beings.